Hi, it's Sandra here from Creating in Spain, and today I wanted to show you a little project that I've been doing recently just for the fun of it, just because it's different and I haven't done it for ages. And this is a little card that I've made, but these elements here are embroidered on, and I think there are probably a lot of people who do machine or hand embroidery, but they don't necessarily think of putting it on a greeting card. But if you're into making cards as well as embroidery, then why not? Now, this particular one has been machine embroidered with a Janome MC 11000. And it's the first time I've done any embroidery on it for a long time. Now, I just wanted to give you some hints and tips about how to get some good results with this. Now, the first thing is hooping. But when it comes to doing things like cards, you don't necessarily want anything very bulky. And so I have come up with a solution for this. And as you can see, this has got no bulk in it whatsoever. The solution is to just hoop up your embroidery stabiliser. Now, this is quite a thin one, so I did use 2 sheets of this. And in fact, eventually I used 3, because what I did was I actually painted with inks the embroidery sheet. So this isn't paper and it's not fabric, it's this stuff. And all I did was I had my glass mat here and I dropped lots of blobs of food colouring as it happens. I mean, I use food colouring because I've got a lot of it. I've got some big bottles. I use it in my airbrush, I use it for painting with, I use it for all sorts of things. Why not? It's colour. So I dropped a load of colour over here and I used my finger, and it's very important if you're going to do this to wear gloves, which I completely forgot at the time, to mix it up and just make some patterns. I made this damp and then just laid it down on top, made sure it was all covered in colour, took it away and let it dry. And I ended up with a few sheets in different colours, and this was one of them. So I have 2 layers of this actually physically hooped up in my embroidery hoop, but I don't actually layer the fabric or whatever it is else that I'm using in my hoop. I float it on top, and all I do for that is I either use double-sided tape and put it on the inside edges of the hoop to just secure it. If I'm using this sort of stuff and only this, that will do it quite happily. If I'm using a fabric, then I'll use a spray adhesive, and I have a temporary spray adhesive. It doesn't say that it's for embroidery, but it disappears when it's dry. It comes unsticky, so it is the same as an embroidery adhesive. And I just spray the back of whatever it is that I want to place on top, and then I put it in my hoop, spread it out, and all is well. That technique also works very well if you want to embroider in awkward places on t-shirts and things. Mark your t-shirt with a cross vertically and horizontally, put your hoop in the machine, and then bring your t-shirt to the hoop and stick it down, and it is so much easier than trying to hoop it up, believe me. Anyway, I digress. So I coloured this stuff, let it dry, and then used it for my design. So that's hooping. The next thing to consider is tension. Now, I don't know if you can see it on here. This was my test piece, but I just liked it anyway. This one here in particular, you can actually see the bobbin thread coming up to the top, and that's because the tension is too tight. Now, on my machine it has an automatic tension which I think is about 2.4 or 2.6, something like that. And all I did to get it to the right tension was I wound that right the way down to number 1. Okay, it was 1.0, and I found that provided much better results, as you can see from this gold one here, and I think that one as well. So that is an important factor. Now, the next thing is threading. Now, if you're using a normal thread, just a normal coloured thread, embroidery thread, you may not have a problem. Now, my machine has 2 thread spools, and one of them will make the thread lie like that, towards the needle going in that direction, and the other one does that sort of position. So it will wind off of there and go to the needle position. So if you are in the habit of using the spool holder that goes like that, what's going to happen with metallic thread certainly is it's going to come off and it's going to curl as it comes off. That's disaster. You will end up with broken thread and you'll be most annoyed. You'll end up rethreading your machine every minute or so. It's no fun, believe me. I've been there, done that. It's absolutely vile, and it makes you think your thread is bad, which it isn't in most cases, and certainly not in the case of the ones I buy. So you don't want to do that. What you want to do with this one is to make it so that it comes off and it rolls like that, if you can possibly manage it. Okay, so you can either, if your machine allows it, it'll either roll off like so, or if you turn it off that way, it'll roll off like so. It's got to come off in the same way that it went on. So if you have an upright spool holder, you'll probably find that is better. There are different spool holders designed for different things that you can buy as accessories to machines, but try out your own spool holder first. You may not need to buy a second one. Now this one, what I like to do with this one is to sit it on my upright spool holder and just let it feed off like so. However, the base of my spool holder on my machine is not actually big enough to cope with the base of this, and so all I did was I made up a disc. As it happens, it was a card disc I made up to sit over my spool holder and just to extend it very slightly, and then that can sit on my spool holder and it will feed, and then I didn't have a problem with the thread breakage. Metallic threads need a larger needle size, and you can get needles specially designed for metallic threads again. But basically, if you're using a metallic thread, you want a size 14 needle, and that will be somewhere around a 90, I think. There's two different numbers that you get on packets of needles, and I think the 14 is equivalent to 90. The ones designed for metallic threads have a longer eye, and they are frequently more sort of rounded. There's less for them to catch on. If you are not using a metallic thread, then you can usually use a size 75 or 11. If you have a very nice, normal, embroidery thread, that will probably be fine. But if you're having problems with your thread shredding and it's not your tension being too tight, then check out your needle. It's always a good idea to check and make sure you're using the correct size. So that's one card I made, but I made a couple of others. And this is another one that I did. Now, all I did for this was I took an SVG file, I converted it in my embroidery software to a GEF file for my embroidery machine, and I did this as an applique. So I used my cutter to cut out the shape, and because it's in the correct format, it's exactly the right size for my design, which is great. And I then set it to do an applique. Now the top layer on this one is slightly different. I think you can see it in this light, but it's actually quite shiny. And what I did for the top layer on this, and underneath it's just the embroidery backing, so I used some of this stuff. It's voile, I think, something like that. But it's just a very nice sort of shiny, sort of very thin, gauzy sort of fabric. I can't remember what it's called. So I used that, And again, all I did was use a spray adhesive and laid that over the top of the stabiliser in my hoop. And as you can see, it's come out fine, not a problem at all. I didn't bother to sew the little antenna, I just used a pen on top of this and I just drew them in with a pen afterwards. And I've just added a few sequins and a few glitzy bits and put a frame around it. So that's a really nice way of using your embroidery. You know, if you want to do some embroidery but you don't have any garments to embroider, cards are a good way of doing it. It comes out really nicely. And then the same file again. This time what I did was I did the applique in exactly the same way, but I appliqued onto felt, so it's kind of thicker, it's a bit more quilted if you like. So I simply appliqued onto the felt and then I cut the felt out manually afterwards, and then I cut out this piece of card slightly bigger than the butterfly to go over the top, and then another frame over the top of that. So there's a few ideas for some embroidery you can do for cards and a few hints and tips along the way. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Take care now.